Good morning. First of all, thank you very much for Professor 𝗀𝗏 for inviting me to deliver a speech as a chief guest here. Indeed, it is Professor 𝗀𝗏 and council members, distinguished invitees and members. It obviously gives me great pleasure to address you all today at the CMA Sri Lanka National Management Accounts Conference on a timely topic that we are seeing here, navigating stability towards dynamic growth. I think it's quite important topic and very, I would say, I must thank organizers for selecting the theme, which is very relevant and timely. And also I see the theme would more relevant to not so to economists, the accounting professional, more to the economists, I think, because we looking at the current status. That's why I think we heard enough from the professionals and what are their practices. And obviously, I really enjoy the Professor 𝗀𝗏's taxation part. Obviously, I must also say my connection to Australia. I have been recently meeting several Australian kind of engagement. 2 weeks ago, I met former Governor 𝗀𝗶 in Mongolia. And the last week, former Prime Minister Scott Morrison was here. So I had a bilateral and good engagement. And then happy to meet distinguished profession from Australia, Professor 𝗀𝗏, and also enjoy the theme on taxation is very, very relevant and timely. So I'm not going to talk about that part. This is obviously the fiscal policy, Minister of Finance and Parliament, we all know that. So am I basically thinking about just to share some of the ideas relating to the stability towards dynamic growth. I think that is because of the theme. I thought I will focus in that area. First of all, I'd like to outline why the stability is critical for achieving what we call dynamic growth, and how our recent experiences illustrate this essential relationship with stability towards the dynamic economic growth. Stability encompasses macroeconomic stability, including low and stable inflation, a stable financial system, resilient external sector, and fiscal discipline. These are the 5 key areas for which we have, at the central bank, monetary authority of the country, we have an important responsibility when it comes to low and stable inflation, stable financial system, and resilient external sector. And of course, fiscal discipline and taxation is by the authorities and government and the Minister of Finance and the Parliament. I will touch more on the central bank's side and our responsibilities. Creating a stable economic environment is a prerequisite for fostering long-term economic growth, and it emphasizes the need for balanced and strategic economic policies that ensure stability while promoting factors that drive growth, such as investment, innovation, and structural reforms. No country has achieved sustained growth in the absence of macroeconomic stability. Sri Lankans have experienced the devastating implications of macroeconomic instability in the wake of economic crisis, which we experienced, the worst economic crisis which we experienced in the history in 2022. Since then, policies were directed to restore stability as a priority, set of priority. Consequently, 2 years from the crisis, we are able to gather here to discuss about the dynamic growth. So let me briefly reflect on our journey towards the stability. As you all know, in 2022, we faced a severe economic crisis with very high inflation, excessive balance of payment pressures, with the acute shortage of foreign exchange liquidity, significant fiscal imbalances, heightened socio-economic and socio-political tensions, and the very distressed financial sector. However, prompt and coordinated implementation of a suite of policy measures by the government and the central bank and the structural reform agenda committed by the government, supported by the International Monetary Fund under the Extended Fund Facility, reinforce overall macroeconomic stability. Subsequently, the recovery from the economic crisis was buttressed by rapid disinflation, improved external resilience, stronger fiscal balances, but still not enough, and preserved financial system stability. So that's where we are now, but still there is a long way to go. In turn, the economy now moving to a recovery path has culminated in Sri Lanka, breaking the streak of 6 consecutive quarters of contraction from 2022 onwards. In the second half of 2023, further to 5.3% growth recorded in the first quarter of 2024. I am sure second quarter is also will follow a similar trend. Leading indicators point to the continuation of this growth momentum during the remainder of the full year, leading to a full growth of almost, we are hoping, close to 4% of year-on-year positive growth after a couple of years of negative contraction of the economy. So let me just briefly touch on our responsibilities, which restoring price stability, one of the things, and building external buffers. Those are the issues that we are facing. The inflation, which had peaked all-time high in September 2022, we all don't talk too much about it, recovered to single-digit levels within a year, 12 months period, as a result of very sharp monetary tightening regime, and the reissue target level by end 2023 within 12 months, with inflation expectations remain very well anchored. Currently, inflation is soaring at lower single digits. So basically, this is where we have several quarters of inflation running around 1 to 2%, compared to our target commitment with the government and inflation targeting regime is 5%. But what we have seen, inflation expectations has now been very well anchored, even much below our inflation target. That's why when you see recently, when the headline inflation, national consumer price inflation, increased to 1 to 2%, as seen the reporting, accelerated of inflation from 1 to 2%, despite our target range is 5%. It's like what is happening in the other part of the advanced countries, where inflation target is 2%. Inflation was running as 5%. And when inflation was, say, 0 to 1%, is not the accelerated inflation, it's still below and underperforming. And this is one of the issues we are facing now. Because of the commitment to maintain single digit with a range, we are breaching the low band of the inflation for a long period. Then we have to report to the parliament and also have consultation with the IMF with our commitment to maintain inflation within the band. We are basically moving below the bands. That's where I think we have to understand this is not an inflation regime. Still, we are moving well below the inflation that we are target, even below the lower band for a longer period. This is one of the reasons today we announced another monetary policy easing measure which enable us to cut policy rates by another 25%. So we are in the path of the monetary policy easing, and we hope that we still have a space going forward, but in carefully and closely monitoring and evidence-based monetary policy under inflation targeting regime. That's what we have. In fact, the significant milestone in the monetary policy implementation was the enactment of the new Central Bank Act last year, which increased the autonomy of central bank and enhanced accountability for our policies. The independence of the central bank has been reinforced by limiting what we call monetary financing, which is something related to taxation, where when government wouldn't have sufficient taxation, then government used to basically tendency to increase monetary financing to bridge the gap, but it's no longer visible. Then also eliminating government representations in the decision making, thereby strengthening monetary policy formulation, the governance, and the accountability of monetary policy. That's the important one. And also, in addition, we have the formally recognized flexible inflation targeting regime as a monetary policy framework, which is most successful, best monetary policy implementation framework that we have seen in practice in a lot of countries, including pioneered by New Zealand and then Australia, Canada, UK, and also emerging market countries like Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, all these countries now moving to us. So we have also now established a very strong monetary policy framework with accountability, credibility, and also with regaining the anchoring inflation expectations. The external sector, on the something related to monetary policy, is also the management of the exchange rate under flexible exchange rate regime, under which we have shown its resilience with the stability now have been to a certain extent restored in 2023 on the back of improved foreign exchange inflows and the reserves through various means, recovering of the exports, remittances, tourism in the service account, and also the balancing the trade account due to some of the measures, obviously import taxation, but that's gradually being relaxed. And this, as mentioned already, someone earlier mentioned, the current account surplus, first time for a long period, was recorded in 2023, and it will be again second year in 2024. With that, we have been gradually increasing our external buffers in terms of resource by about 5.6 billion. It's not very large, but still coming from where we were in the crisis, we are basically making good progress, especially under the reform program and stabilization program. And also a small comment on the exchange rate management. And because we, Sri Lanka, used to have a kind of a exchange rate regime where central bank was trying to manage the control the exchange rate, but now current regime is a flexible inflation targeting regime where the exchange rate is determined through the market, demand and supply, and also inconsistent overall macro fundamentals. So under this inflation targeting framework, we are seeing the relative stability compared to the huge volatility we had, and as a result, there is some appreciation last year and this year, and we are seeing a gradual movement, and also we are building up buffers in terms of reserves. Going forward, the central bank remains committed to maintaining a market-determined and flexible exchange rate that can serve as a buffer against external shocks. That's we need to understand the role of the exchange rate is to create a buffer against external shocks. If there is a unexpected shock, exchange rate will have to reflect the shocks. So there's a kind of shock absorber in terms of flexible inflation targeting regime. This approach is expected to help correct what we call anti-export bias that was seen in the past and undue speculation and volatility. So that's the very clear, transparent framework on the monetary policy and exchange rate management. So I also have a few points on the revenue-based fiscal consolidation. I don't want to discuss too details because there's a good policy discussion we already heard. The taxation side, all I can say that we are well aware of the revenue-focused fiscal consolidation part that the government has undertaken to reinstate fiscal sector sustainability. As we right now we heard what are the relevant tax to GDP ratios which is needed for a country like us. Obviously, 29%, 30% OECD countries, Australia, we are well below. We are trying to reach 15% of GDP compared to where we are now. It's still a difficult process. We have recognized the role played by the government, Minister of Finance, and also the Parliament in implementing very difficult fiscal and taxation reforms, expenditure, fiscal rules, and next important one is the Public Financial Management Bill that will be passed by the Parliament in the near future. That basically specified binding fiscal rules in the form of primary expenditure ceiling, primary balance target, and government debt target, paving the way for better macroeconomic management in terms of fiscal discipline. And also the important reform that already passed by the Parliament was a public debt management law, which was the responsibility of central bank earlier. Now it's expected to, new law is expected to establish a new debt management office. It will amalgamate current debt management functions of the central bank and the Minister of Finance, assuring prudent debt management and address through an independent central authority, address the conflict of interest central bank is having in managing public debt. So that part also now has addressed. It's a institutional establishment institution is in the process. Within about 12 to 18 months, that authority will be established. With that, that will ensure, with the public financial management bill, will ensure medium to long-term fiscal sustainability and the credible path of fiscal going forward on a sustainable basis, irrespective of any administration going forward. Let me briefly touch on our other responsibility, which is to ensure financial system stability. As you know, all Sri Lanka central bank is entrusted with the maintaining financial system stability. We don't have a separate authority like FSA in Australia, New Zealand, or like some other countries. Central bank prides itself on ensuring financial stability, even in the midst of the crisis. We all know bankers, the difficulties bank system stability, financial institutions were facing in 2022, first during the liquidity issues, and then the capital and the asset quality issues, that we have been able to come out and maintain the stability. And our sector, financial sector, demonstrated its resilience, stemming from proactive and prudent policies and greater preparedness for the crisis in an event. So we are now have all the mechanisms in place. Amidst challenges, the banking sector, which dominates the financial sector in Sri Lanka, was able to maintain stability by preserving capital adequacy levels, supported by the decline in risk-weighted assets, while liquidity was maintained above the regulatory minimum. That now liquidity is not an issue. Central bank continue to engage in activities relating to financial inclusion, which is a new mandate under the new Act. Financial inclusion is also given to the central bank. Financial consumer protection and ensuring the provisioning of robust financial infrastructure, social payment and settlement infrastructure for the smooth functioning of the finance sector. Those are also our responsibilities. The resilience of the financial sector is expected to improve further with the dissipation of macroeconomic vulnerabilities in the period ahead. With the easy monetary conditions, as reflected through downward interest rate movements that we have seen from the sharp increase we have seen in the last 2 years, and dissipating the uncertainty priced in interest rates, credit to the private sector is expected to rebound in 2024 from the contraction that we have seen in the last 2 years. Banks are expected to rebalance the asset allocation with the normalizing yield curves on government securities, which were once inverted, and the correction of the anomaly in the risk-free rates being higher than the lending rates. So that was anomaly being now adjusted. The envisaged credit growth that is necessary for the dynamic intermediate to long-term growth, and the gradual easing of trade-related restrictions and improving repayment capacities are expected to improve the credit quality of the banking sector further going forward. A robust growth in digital transactions as another area of improving efficiency of the finance sector that is expected in the landscape of payment and settlements due to the increased transaction through instant payment facilitated by online banking and mobile payment applications. That we also encourage the adoption of and promotion of digitalization, especially in the financial sector. Awareness campaigns on digital transaction methods will be conducted to increase the uptake of digital payments by customers and merchants. So that will also help on the other side taxation. The digitalization is one of the ways to improve taxation. Central bank will closely collaborate with financial institutions to support the expansion of safe, efficient and reliable digital payment mechanisms in the country. How digitalization can help and technology can help taxation, I can share one small experience while in Australia. short period, I was also a taxpayer there. And it was, how efficient and easy for for me to file a tax return and get a refund within 2 weeks period, and without any interaction from anyone. I never get to know whom with I interact. It's only the system. That's a very, very efficient system. And I'm sure you have much more expertise how this has been developed for a long period. I think that is where we think. Very minimal fee for a newcomer, new person who went into taxation in Australia. The minimal fee from a tax consultant, even without that, one can do quite easily individual taxation. And it's a very efficient system. I hope that you can share some of the experiences in your with your great exposure to this sector, this technology and the digital means of, and obviously that will be a challenge for the accounting professionals in Sri Lanka. I know largely they depend on the taxation. All this auditing and taxation is a big industry here. Then let me touch briefly on the IMF External Fund Facility Program and the debt restructuring. The Sri Lanka's strong performance under the IMF EFA program was also been instrumental in restoring macroeconomic stability, and it has complemented the external debt restructuring process. So in June this year, 2024, Executive Board completed the Article 4 consultation and the second review, the third disbursement happened, and then brought that almost $1 billion from the IMF. Financing is not the important one, but the successful progress, the continuous progress made under the program is the most important. In terms of debt restructuring, domestic debt restructuring, we all know, you all were involved, especially CS Sri Lanka. I have to thank them for their role that they played, helping, giving guidance as the regulator of the Chartered Institute, completed last year. Then this year, June, Sri Lanka and members of the Official Credit Committee formalized the treatment terms in a MOU, following which Sri Lanka is currently engaging and already signed. All the members of the Affairs Club have signed the MOU. Now it's complete, and also we have also signed MOU with Exim Bank of China parallelly with as non-OCC members. That part has been completed, and also by early July 2024, we also, following some negotiations, the steering committee of the ad hoc group for bondholders, who represent more than 50% of Sri Lankan bonds globally, and we agreed co-financial terms of restructuring of the ISPs, embodied in what we call joint working framework, that has been now submitted to the Secretary of the Official Credit Committee. They would assess these terms for comparability of treatment, that we had ensured any debt treatment or relief should be comparable across the creditors. That test now is being done by the OCC, while the IMF also would confirm the consistency of the parameters under the debt sustainability analysis of the IMF. These are the necessary processes that we have to go through, that we are in that process. The successful completion of external debt restructuring in the near term and continuous commitment to implement reforms under the IMF EFA program for next up to 2027 will help eliminate the lingering uncertainties while improving investor confidence in a sustained manner. The successful conclusion of debt restructuring would help improving the country out of what they call restricted default status by the sovereign rating agencies right now. Selective default or excessive default, that category, come out this category soon after we complete the debt restructuring process, which will bring many tangible benefits to the country. And this is the next important step moving towards the growth agenda, to the dynamic growth from the stability. Let me make few points on the structural reform. That's also one important area for us to complete and move into a dynamic growth. first one, stability, both monetary policy, fiscal policy, financial system stability. Then next important one is for any dynamic growth, we need to have a important medium to long-term structural reforms. The recent crisis is also a result of several structural weaknesses. Some of them already discussed by previous speakers in several ways, anti-corruption measures, all the doing business, all these things, that these weaknesses have persisted in the Sri Lankan economy over many decades. Those are not issues that we have seen in the recent past. It has been over many decades. The ongoing reform agenda comprises measures that are expected to augment the resilience of the economy through these reforms, thereby ensuring a positive and sustained growth trajectory. That is what we call dynamic growth trajectory. In addition to fiscal consolidation, the reform centers around few areas: social safety net, fiscal institutions, that is what public finance management is all about, the state-owned enterprises, addressing corruption and corruption vulnerabilities, and raising potential growth, for example, are imperative to building a strong and resilient macroeconomic foundation for dynamic growth in the future. Another important area in the structural reforms is addressing corruption vulnerabilities, already talked about, and the government is also in the process of strengthening the legislative framework in relation to governance. The Anti-Corruption Act has been approved by Parliament in August 2023 with the aim of aligning Sri Lanka's anti-corruption laws and practices with internationally recognized norms, standards and best practices. Now it's up to the implementation of these institutional reforms. The government has prepared an action plan to implement the recommendations outlined in what we call governance diagnostic assessment that was independently done by the IMF in 2023. Based on the recommendations, now there's a roadmap has already been announced how to implement those, address those weaknesses and fill the gaps in the processes. Now, final comments on the growth, because we're talking about the dynamic growth going forward. So given the necessity of fiscal consolidation to ensure that sustainability, the major growth driver should be in the private sector in the period ahead. We can't have no longer public sector driven growth that we had in the past with huge fiscal imbalances and high sovereign debt. However, the government has a key role in nurturing the private sector growth through the implementation of long overdue, as I said earlier, structural reforms in factor markets, state-owned business enterprises, and the public sector service delivery. So government has a role to address all this area, especially labor market, the land market, and also the productivity and human capital markets, and also state-owned businesses and public sector service delivery with very large public sector. That's also very important. Mitigating recurring external sector imbalance, that is the other part. We have to play a role as central bank, and their sustainability concerns could be addressed through well-coordinated policy planning and implementation to expand diversity and position of both merchandise exports and services, export of goods and services, increasing what we call non-debt creating forex inflows, such as worker remittance for investment to tradable sectors, and also enhancing foreign exchange earnings. The third issue that I like to touch on is related to land ownerships, and other one is low female labor force participation that has been inherent issue in Sri Lanka, and skills mismatch in the labor market. This is one of the role that you institutions are playing to provide sufficient skills into the emerging sectors. Obstacles faced by micro, small and medium enterprises in accessing credit markets, access to credit and financial literacy and financial education are few important sector reforms that are imperative to harness the available resources to bring the economy into a high dynamic trajectory, because we know we are not in an advantage position in terms of demography. We need to use our labor force, skill up, and get the unutilized female labor force into the workforce. and improve the productivity of the labor force through skills and technology. Otherwise, we are not in a country which has abundant labor, especially with the demographic changes for next several years. Then another important area is to transform loss-making state enterprises. This is also a very important area to make the state enterprises into productive and market-oriented institutions that we talk about cost recovery pricing. This is crucial to reduce the burden on government budget and release resources in the banking sector, where there are huge exposures to banking sector by state enterprises, to release those resources from the state enterprises exposures to the private sector, and also to productive sectors in the economy, rather than lending to loss-making state enterprises to meet their liquidity requirements. So that's, I think, there are a lot of reforms that have been already done. We are moving towards the right path there. While divesting non-strategic investment, this is a very kind of a debated topic in Sri Lanka. Divestment means someone is investing in state enterprises. Investment does not mean the selling off and taking the profit institution somewhere else. It's all about putting new money and having changing the share ownership, either the private or public, and put more money, make institution more efficient, and provide public support services to the public in a much more competitive manner. That we need to understand what is the divestment of external enterprises means much more efficient economy. The government should intervene in the markets only to address market failures and to ensure proper regulations of markets if required, not to do business to the state-owned enterprises. Further improving the doing business environment is another important long-term reforms through efficient public sector service delivery, I already mentioned, reduction in corruption, ensuring property rights, and minimizing bureaucratic red tapes is essential to foster a conducive environment for the economy to thrive. Then obviously attracting foreign direct investment will be crucial for sustaining growth. That's already talked about it. As the investor confidence improves, consequent to debt restructuring, maintenance of a business-friendly policy framework with persistent improvements to the doing business environment is essential to attract investments to the potential sectors such as ports, energy, tourism, and other sectors that we see a huge potential in Sri Lanka. And obviously from our side, the low interest rate environment, which is currently in place in line with our inflation target, and this help obviously address the other uncertainties in terms of low and stable inflation. The industrial sector has to leverage this low interest and low inflation environment to transform itself into high value added, one by moving away from traditional and simple products to more complex yet competitive and high quality products. That is the future for us to prosper, to earn more foreign exchange through industrialization. Another important area that I want to touch is ongoing transformation, which is long overdue, is the digitalization drive. We have a program called DigiEcon 2030 program of the government, which seeks to accelerate Sri Lanka's transformation into a digital economy. It will help consolidate Sri Lanka's efforts towards sustained and inclusive growth, and of course the progression towards the middle income status. Digitalization is a must. So finally, in conclusion, going forward, it's important for all stakeholders, all of you professionals and all of us bureaucrats, officials and public service, as well as the private sector, government, the private sector and even households, to remain committed to the reform path. That's very important. The reform path is quite important. We need to move in the same direction without deviating from that, and that could result in a worse situation, and ensure that long-term, long overdue reforms are expeditiously implemented and supported by the people in this country to set the economy on track towards sustained, inclusive and sustainable growth. In today's rapidly evolving economic landscape, the pursuit of dynamic growth while maintaining stability is more challenging and more critical than ever. I hope this conference will provide a platform. I've seen the very useful discussions in the technical sessions. We'll provide a platform to discuss the policy responses and debate about all these things, have a better understanding about all these things, both in retrospect and in a forward-looking approach, and insight into how best the economy could be navigated towards greater stability and dynamic growth. Thank you very much.